Marduk compelled Gutium and the whole of the Medes to bow at his feet. All of humankind Marduk delivered into his hands. Cyrus assiduously shepherded them with truth and justice. All the people of Babylon, the entirety of Sumer and Akkad, nobles and governors, they bowed before Cyrus, they kneeled, they kissed his feet. They rejoiced in his kingship, and their faces glowed. Cyrus Cylinder, line 13 to 18.
In 551 BC, Cyrus the Great led his forces onto the plain of Pasargadae for the final confrontation with the Medes. The survival or destruction of the Persians depended on the outcome of this battle. With a resolute face, Cyrus arranged the ranks of his soldiers. At that moment, horsemen brought word of the Medes' arrival. At the king's signal, the standards were raised high, and every soldier stood firmly in his place. For a brief moment, absolute silence reigned over the plain, but soon, the marching rhythm of the Median infantry broke the stillness. The childhood and youth of Cyrus the Great remain one of history's great enigmas, provoking much debate and controversy among historians. The stories that refer to his early years are filled with motifs of local and native legends, such as the hero whose coming was foretold, or the champion of humble origins. Some of the motifs within Cyrus's tale are rooted in Iranian tradition and culture, while others bear striking similarities to the myths of Mesopotamia and ancient Greece. The accounts of Cyrus's youth recall the legends of Sargon of Akkad, the Greek Perseus, the Iranian heroes Feridun and Khosrow, as well as the Karnamag Ardaksha Pabagan, the Book of Deeds of Ardashir, son of Papak. These parallels, coupled with errors and inconsistencies in the writings of Greek historians, have led many modern scholars to doubt the accuracy of their accounts regarding the early life of Cyrus. Unfortunately, reconstructing this period of his biography is possible only through speculation, for the surviving evidence is exceedingly scarce. The only point that can be confirmed with certainty, based on the writings of Greek historians and the evidence of archaeology, is that in the 7th century BC, the kingdoms of Media and Persia were both in the process of expanding their power. Yet the exact nature of their relationship remains unclear. In the past, historians, relying heavily on Greek sources, considered Persia and the eastern lands of the Iranian plateau as part of the Median realm. However, modern scholars such as Matt Waters, Pierre Bryant, Maria Brosius, and others have cast doubt on this assumption. For a long time, the Medes were viewed exclusively through the lens of Greek historiography. According to Herodotus, the Medes possessed an empire comparable to that of the Achaemenids. But today, Assyrian inscriptions and archaeological records have gained far greater weight, and these sources reveal no evidence of a vast Median empire. Instead, they portray the Medes as scattered tribes, often in conflict with one another. The absence of administrative documents from within the supposed Median state further supports this conclusion. Had such an empire existed, we would expect to see an extensive bureaucratic system similar to that of the Assyrians, Babylonians, or Achaemenids. It thus appears that in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, the Medes consisted of a collection of independent kingdoms that formed a loose confederation, represented by a single, big-man ruler chosen from among them. The exact extent and borders of this Median confederacy remain obscure. Since no evidence has been found of Median dominance over the Persians, we may reasonably conclude that the Persians retained their independence during this period. It is possible that Astyages sought alliance with the Persians by giving his daughter in marriage to Cambyses. Yet no firm evidence exists to confirm such a union, and it seems more plausible that the story of Cambyses' marriage to Mandane was later Persian propaganda, crafted to legitimize their eventual rule over the Medes. According to historians' estimates, Cyrus the Great must have been born sometime between 600 and 588 BC. In his youth, he chose Princess Cassandane as his wife, a union that strengthened his position within the Achaemenid dynasty, for her father, Pharnapates, was a man of great influence and power. Under the rule of Cambyses, Cyrus's father, the Persians were a peaceful and conciliatory state. But in 559 BC, when Cambyses abdicated and placed his son upon the throne, the Persians began their ascent. Herodotus reports that at the beginning of his reign, Cyrus sought to unite the other Persian tribes under his leadership. According to his account, after meeting with the noble families and tribal chiefs, Cyrus persuaded them to acknowledge his authority and to provide him with troops in support. From Herodotus's narrative, it appears that Cyrus's power, even in the early years of his kingship, extended beyond the city of Anshan to encompass all of Persis and Kerman. His subsequent movements are uncertain, but it is not improbable that at this time Cyrus may have succeeded in extending his control as far as Susa, thereby bringing all of ancient Elam under his dominion. At the same time as Cyrus was consolidating his power in the south, the Medes were engaged in conflict with the Babylonians in the north. Although the precise details of the war between these two powers remain unclear, Babylonian inscriptions mention that the city of Haran was besieged by the Median army. It seems that Astyages sought to take advantage of Babylon's internal strife in order to expand his authority into northern Mesopotamia. Around 553 BC, he advanced as far as Haran, captured the city, and plundered it. Yet quite suddenly, he withdrew his forces from Mesopotamia and marched toward Persia. Some historians have suggested that the reason for this Median withdrawal lay in the actions of the Persians. It is possible that an alliance between Babylon and Persia had been formed against Median domination. Fearing that while he was entangled in Mesopotamia, the Persians might seize the opportunity to capture Ecbatana, Astyages dispatched an army under the command of Harpagus to confront them. Yet, according to the account of Herodotus, instead of fighting Cyrus, Harpagus surrendered to him. This turn of events compelled Astyages to withdraw his forces from Mesopotamia and retreat to his capital. In an inscription dating from the reign of Nabonidus, it is said that Marduk, the great god of Babylon, would send a man named Cyrus to deliver the people from the hands of the Medes. Because of Harpagus's betrayal, Astyages grew suspicious of all his officers and commanders. Before marching against the Persians, he sought to secure the loyalty of his army by initiating extensive reforms and purges of potential dissenters. The imprisonment and removal of his opponents caused great discontent among the Median nobility, but Astyages paid little heed. In 551 BC, with an army reinforced by fresh recruits, he set out toward Persia to bring Cyrus down. Cyrus, having already prepared for this conflict, swiftly mustered his forces and stationed them at the Median frontier. He ordered Harpagus to gather all women and children from villages and hamlets without fortifications and to shelter them within a border stronghold. Cyrus and his army then arrayed themselves outside the fortress, ready to confront Astyages. In the early spring of 551 BC, Astyages and his forces reached the Persian frontier. According to Greek historians, his colossal army consisted of 1 million infantry, 200,000 cavalry, and 3,000 war chariots, numbers which are clearly exaggerated, for the actual strength of the Median army must have been far smaller. Astyages positioned himself at the center of his host, surrounded by 20,000 personal guards. On the opposing side, the Persians had already taken their positions on the battlefield before the arrival of the Medes and stood fully prepared. According to Ctesias, Cyrus commanded 300,000 light infantry, 50,000 cavalry, and 100 war chariots, though these figures too are unreliable. Cyrus placed himself at the center of the army alongside the infantry, with 10,000 of his finest troops stationed closest to him. The Persian infantry were equipped with bows, spears, and shields, enabling them to fight both from a distance and in close combat. On his right flank, Cyrus positioned his father, Cambyses, who commanded part of the infantry and cavalry. This wing also included scythed chariots, which, according to Xenophon, had been invented by Cyrus himself. The left flank was entrusted to Harpagus and the Median soldiers under his command. As was customary in Greek historiography, the numbers of troops on both sides were vastly inflated. In reality, the Median army likely numbered no more than 60,000 men, while the Persian host comprised roughly 45,000 warriors. The battle began at Astyages' command to attack. The Medes, seeking to escape the hail of Persian arrows, rushed forward and engaged the Persian lines in close combat. In the center of the battlefield, it was the Persians who held the advantage. Cyrus himself personally led the elite infantry, gradually pushing the Medes back. On the flanks, however, the Medes gained the upper hand due to their numerical superiority. To reinforce his right wing, Cyrus ordered the scythed chariots to charge against the left flank of the Median army. Their assault was devastating, cutting down many Medes beneath the blades of the chariots. Ctesias recounts that upon witnessing this, Astyages cried out in excitement, "Alas, how brave these terebinth-eating Persians are!" He then threatened his officers and commanders, warning them that if they were defeated by the Persians, they would face severe punishment. Although the charge of the chariots had inflicted heavy losses upon the Medes, their numerical superiority prevented the Median army from suffering a decisive blow. Wave after wave of their assaults gradually wore down the Persian ranks. Cyrus, observing that his forces on the flanks were slowly being driven back, realized clearly that if the struggle continued with such intensity, his wings would soon collapse and the heart of his army would be encircled. He therefore ordered his officers and commanders to withdraw steadily and in perfect order, disengaging from the Median lines and falling back toward the fortress. The Persians carried out Cyrus's commands with discipline, retreating safely behind the fortress walls. Recognizing, however, that the stronghold could not be held for long, Cyrus assigned a portion of his soldiers to escort the women and children toward the plain of Pasargadae, where another fortress stood. Then, with stirring words, he sought to give courage to his companions. "Death lies before all of us, whether we are victorious or defeated. Therefore, if it must be, it is better to meet it in victory, having set our homeland free." At dawn the following day, the Persians opened the gates of the fortress. Under the command of Cyrus and Harpagus, they marched out to face the enemy, while Cambyses remained inside with part of the army to support Cyrus and his men in case of retreat. The Persians and the Medes once again arrayed their forces and clashed in battle. According to his prior plan, Astyages had assigned 10,000 of his troops to assault the walls of the fortress. While the Persians and Medes fought in the plain before it, these 10,000 elite Median soldiers managed to reach the fortress walls and, after fierce combat, captured it. Cambyses, the aged lion, after cutting down several Median warriors, was wounded and at last compelled to surrender himself to the Medes. When Cyrus learned of these events, he immediately ordered a retreat. The first confrontation between the two rivals had proved highly challenging. Although the Persians succeeded in destroying a greater number of enemy troops, the loss of their fortress and the capture of Cambyses forced them to withdraw. A few days after his capture, Cambyses succumbed to the wounds he had sustained on the battlefield. Astyages, however, laid him to rest with great honor. Cyrus withdrew his army along narrow, winding routes through which the larger Median host could not easily advance. Owing to his familiarity with the terrain, he reached Pasargadae before his rival. Arriving first, Cyrus took advantage of this position by choosing the ground for battle. He stationed his troops upon a hill and waited for the Medes to arrive. Soon after, Astyages and his forces appeared, drawing up their lines at the foot of the hill. Confident in the strength of his numbers, Astyages gave the order to attack, disregarding the Persians' superior position. As soon as the Medes came within range, the Persian archers unleashed a hail of arrows upon them. Burdened by the uphill advance, the Medes' pace slowed considerably, making them easy prey for the archers. Their losses were heavy, yet with bravery, they pressed forward and soon reached the Persian infantry lines. A fierce clash between the two sides ensued. The Battle of Pasargadae proved far bloodier than the previous encounter. The Medes fought with great courage against their rival. Cyrus and Harpagus rode from one side of the field to the other, encouraging their soldiers and lifting their spirits. Cyrus reminded his men that they fought for the women and children who had taken refuge within the fortress, an appeal that gave them renewed determination. The Persian archers, who at the outset had rained arrows upon the enemy, eventually exhausted their supply of shafts as the struggle dragged on. In place of arrows, they began hurling stones at their foes. Casualties on both sides were heavy, yet the Medes suffered greater losses. As darkness fell, Astyages gave the order to withdraw, and the two armies drew apart, preparing to resume the contest the following day. With the rising of the sun, the Medes emerged once more from their camp. This time, Astyages stationed 5,000 of his soldiers, with strict orders to decapitate any man who refused to ascend the hill or attempted to retreat. The second day of battle was even more ferocious. Once again, the Medes' numerical superiority tipped the scales in their favor. The Persians, losing heart, retreated rapidly toward the fortress. Cyrus strove to rally his soldiers and restore order to the ranks, but his efforts proved unsuccessful. The Persians stood but a step away from disaster. Yet as they reached the foot of the fortress walls, they beheld their wives and mothers upon the ramparts, reproaching them for their retreat. The boldness of the Persian women rekindled courage within Cyrus's host. At the very moment when the Persians had broken and were in flight, the Medes, believing themselves victorious and convinced that their enemy was already overcome with fear, abandoned their formations in pursuit. Seeking plunder and eager to inflict the greatest possible losses upon the fleeing foe, they broke ranks and lost their order. By a stroke of misfortune for the Medes, Cyrus succeeded in rallying his troops once more at the foot of the fortress walls. When his eyes fell upon the disordered Median lines, he wasted no time and immediately charged. Taken completely by surprise, the Medes could mount no effective resistance. The Persian assault was crushing and decisive. Astyages, having lost much of his army, turned to flee, but his officers and commanders seized him and delivered him into Cyrus's hands. Unlike the kings of old, Cyrus acted with magnanimity. He honored Astyages as though he were his own father and accorded him a place of dignity. Following this resounding victory, Cyrus ordered the construction of royal gardens and palaces upon the plain of Pasargadae to eternally commemorate his triumph over the Medes. From that time onward, whenever Cyrus returned to Pasargadae, he bestowed gifts of gold and silver upon the Persian women in remembrance of their valor during the Battle of Pasargadae. In 550 BC, once the Persian army had rested and regained its strength, Cyrus marched with Astyages toward Ecbatana. As the Persians neared the city, the Medes opened their gates, and Cyrus entered without resistance. Unlike the kings of old, who would destroy the capitals of their enemies, Cyrus inflicted not the slightest harm upon Ecbatana. Instead, he chose it as his second capital. By such honorable conduct, he demonstrated that he was unlike any of the rulers who had come before him. With the fall of Ecbatana, the entire dominion of the Median kingdom came under Cyrus's rule. News of this victory shook the world. In the east, the Iranian kingdoms came forth to pay homage, offering their friendship and swearing alliances with him. In the west, however, Croesus, king of Lydia, was struck with fear at the sudden collapse of the Medes. To confront Cyrus, he forged alliances with other regional powers and set his army in motion to destroy the Persian kingdom. In the next episode, we will cover the war between Cyrus and Croesus, the king of Lydia. So make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be informed as soon as the new episode is uploaded.